What's up, investors? It's the Russian Dude. Today's briefing has a very strange structure, because on one side Volodymyr Zelenskiy says his latest talks with the US negotiators were positive, that Ukraine and the United States are finalizing a document on security guarantees, and that an eastern ceasefire could still serve as a meaningful signal if Moscow wanted diplomacy to succeed. On the other side, Russia's actual response was not silence, not restraint, not even tactical ambiguity, but just, well, what they usually do, continued strikes, including a wave that Zelensky said involved more than 700 drones, many of them Shaheds, while Ukraine says Russian forces are also still pressing forward near Pishchane in the Kupiansk district of Kharkiv Oblast. At the same time, another track of the war is becoming impossible to ignore, because Ukraine is not only defending itself in the air and the front lines, it is also putting direct pressure on Russia's economic engine, with new reports saying Ukrainian strikes have reduced Russian oil export capability by about 1 million barrels per day, or roughly 20% of total capacity. While Moscow has now banned even fully gasoline exports by producers until the end of July as one of the measures to countermeasure what is happening right now in the oil industry. And then there is a deeper layer of the story. The layer that makes today important, because just the usual battlefield update is not just enough. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces and defense intelligence say they struck Kirovske airfield near Krasnosilske in occupied Crimea, destroying completely a very important training base for Orion heavy drones, then 4 Orion drones themselves, an N-72P transport aircraft, and a Soviet-era P-37 Mech radar, using Ukrainian-made FP-2 systems with 60 to 100 kilogram warheads. Meanwhile, Naftogaz said Russia carried out 129 attacks on Ukrainian gas and heating facilities during the 151-day heating season, heating pipelines, production sites, underground storages, and heating systems themselves. While another then report says Russia's shadow fleet moving sanctioned oil continues, and then they use Starlink terminals and even cryptocurrency, with intermediaries in places like China, Namibia, and Oman. So much to unpack, so let's talk about all of that in today's briefing. Here is a very important part. Diplomacy is not actually frozen right now. It just looks frozen if you only watch the explosions and just skip the political details. Reuters reported that Zelensky described his latest talks with the US mediators as positive, and those talks included Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Lindsey Graham, and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. That is a very unusual mix of names, because it combines the Trump orbit, a Republican hawk, and a head of NATO in one conversation around Ukraine's future security arrangement. Zelensky said Ukraine and the United States agreed to strengthen a document on US security guarantees, and he framed that as something that could pave the way to a reliable end to the war. Now, on paper it sounds encouraging, even promising. It tells you that despite all the noise, despite all the public frustration, despite all the talk that Ukraine is slipping down the global priority list, some real negotiation architecture is still being built. But the catch is that the battlefield never waits for the diplomats. Zelensky also said Russia answered his proposal for an Eastern ceasefire with continued strikes, and he tied that response directly to Moscow's unwillingness to give diplomacy a meaningful chance. He noted that Easter on the Orthodox calendar falls on April 12th this year, and he argued that even a temporary silence would be a very powerful signal. Moscow rejected the idea as just Zelensky's PR stunt. I mean, that should tell you something very important, right? Russia still seems more interested in entering talks from a position of force rather than in creating a neutral pose that could stabilize the situation. And then you add the political atmosphere around all of this. Trump said the United States should have never gotten involved in Ukraine, argued that billions of dollars were spent across the ocean, repeated his claim that the previous administration gave Ukraine $350 billion without getting anything in return, and said that now the US is selling ammunition while the Europe is paying for it. Whether you agree with him or with this framing or not, what actually matters strategically is that these comments create uncertainty. They tell Moscow that American backing could become way more transactional, more conditional, and more politically contested. That's literally all Putin wants. And if Russia believes Western unity has a time limit, then from the Kremlin's perspective, the incentive is extremely obvious. Just keep pushing now, because the diplomatic climate might get softer later. I mean, that is exactly what they see right now happening. This is also where the Iran factor enters the picture. Zelensky explicitly said Ukraine had fallen well below Iran and Washington's priorities after US and Israel launched attacks on Tehran in late February. That line matters because it confirms what many feared. Russia may see distraction not as a background noise, but as a strategic opportunity. If the White House, Congress, NATO publics, and the media ecosystem are all increasingly split between Ukraine and the Middle East, then every week of sustained pressure becomes way more valuable for Moscow. That does not mean Ukraine is abandoned, not yet. Hopefully never. It just means that the margin for diplomatic error gets much smaller. And that is why the next chapter matters so much, because if diplomacy is moving slowly while battlefield pressure is moving fast, then what is even happening on the front becomes even more decisive. And as always, by the way guys, if you want some bonus content like GoPro combat footage right from Ukrainian front lines, please make sure to check our Patreon, link is down below. Thanks so much, let's continue. Now here's where things get tricky. A lot of people hear Russian advance near Pishchane and just immediately shrug because, well, they think, okay, just one more village name, one more small movement, same story as always. But that is exactly how people miss turning points in this war. Deep State reported that Russian forces advanced near Pishchane on the Kupiansk district of Kharkiv region. And while the report itself is extremely short, I mean it is just a statement of a fact, the implication is not. Pishchane sits in an area where even incremental Russian movement creates pressure on Ukrainian defenses in the northeast and forces Kyiv to keep manpower, logistics and artillery attention locked into sectors that might otherwise support operations elsewhere. Small gains matter because they do stack. They change supply routes, fire control geometry, drone exposure and the mental sense of the initiative itself. And when you combine that with Zelenskyy's statement that Russian forces are conducting an intensified spring offensive, the local advance near Pishchane stops looking like just isolated tactical note and starts looking like a part of a broader pattern. Russia may not be producing dramatic operational breakthroughs every single day, but it is still testing lines, still exploiting fatigue, still probing for weak sectors, and still trying to force Ukraine to spend time and resources on defense rather than on shaping strikes and maneuver elsewhere. But Ukraine is also trying to redefine what holding means. This is not 2022 anymore, where the whole conversation was about giant mechanized breakthroughs and long arrows on the maps. Ukraine increasingly compensates for pressure on the front lines by raising the cost behind the front lines. If Russia pushes near Pishchane, Ukraine answers in Crimea. If Moscow keeps sending drones and energy infrastructure, Ukraine squeezes refineries, export terminals and fuel logistics. That does not erase the danger on the front lines, obviously, but at least it changes the equation. It tells Russian planners that every additional kilometer of pressure in Kharkiv or Donbass or somewhere else may come with a price somewhere much deeper inside their own system. And that is why this battlefield chapter cannot be understood in isolation. The frontline is not just the frontline anymore, it is now connected directly to Crimea, Ust-Luga, gas policy, shipping, storage capacity and even Western attention spans. So before we talk about what Russia is trying to gain, we need to talk about what Ukraine just showed it can reach. Let's do it right now. This is what changed everything. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, together with defense intelligence, said they struck a base and pre-flight training point for Orion strike reconnaissance drones at Kirovske airfield near Krasnosilske in occupied Crimea. According to Robert Magyar Brody, the strike destroyed 4 Orion drones, an An-72P transport aircraft and P-37 Mech mobile circular scan radar station. The weapons reportedly used for Ukrainian-made FP-2 middle strike systems carrying 60 to 100 kg warheads. Now let's slow down here because these details do matter. The Orion is not just some disposable toy, it's not Shahed. Ukrainska Pravda knows that it can remain airborne for up to 24 hours, has an operational range of up to 250 kilometers, can carry up to 200 kilograms of payload, and costs more than $5 million per unit. In other words, these are valuable, high-end reconnaissance and strike platforms, and if 4 confirmed units were destroyed at a training site, then this is not just about equipment losses, it is about cycle disruption. It is about training disruption, it is about operator readiness, it is even about changing tempo. The same goes for An-72P and P-37 Mech radar. An aircraft loss hurts logistics and transport flexibility. A radar loss hurts awareness and coordination. When you remove those two pieces together, you're not just subtracting just metal and parts. You're reducing the speed and confidence with which Russia can operate from that location. And the symbolism matters too. Crimea remains one of the clearest ways Ukraine can demonstrate that occupation does not equal security. Every successful strike there reminds Russian commanders, Russian pilots, Russian logistics planners, that even Russian citizens living in Crimea, that rear areas are no longer truly safe. And there is a broader strategic message here. Ukraine keeps leaning harder into a war model where domestically produced systems, especially drones and precision strike assets, compensate for constraints elsewhere. If Ukrainian-made FP-2 systems are reaching this kind of target set, that tells partners and adversaries alike that Ukraine's local defense industrial learning curve is continuing. That matters not just for this week, but the whole year, because if Ukraine can keep expanding the quality, the expanding reach and affordability of its strike toolkits, then even without headline-grabbing breakthroughs on the map, it can still keep making life more expensive for Russia behind the front lines. And speaking of expensive, the next chapter is where the story gets even more strange. Because Russia is not only fighting with drones and missiles, it is also fighting with deception, panic, and psychological contamination. Let's talk about it now next chapter. Here's something most people do not expect from a Frontline update. Fake money dropped from drones. Local authorities in Chernihiv and Sumy regions reported that Russian forces dropped leaflets designed to look like Ukrainian 100 hryvnia banknotes. These were found in Snovsk and Novgorod-Siversky, and according to officials, the fake banknotes contain QR codes leading to social media channel promising news and real money. Authorities obviously warn people not to touch them and definitely not to scan them. Now maybe someone hears that and laughs, fake cash from drones, really? But that reaction misses the point completely. This is not about the face value of a fake banknote. It's about how cheap, scalable, and psychologically intrusive modern warfare has become. And drone does not need to deliver only explosives or surveillance anymore. It can deliver confusion, it can deliver malware risk, it can deliver propaganda, it can even exploit curiosity. It can target the civilian digital environment in a way that looks almost absurd until you realize how effective that kind of tactic can be in border areas already under stress. But luckily, most Ukrainian civilians were smart enough not to scan them so well. This new Russia strategy failed miserably. And now connect that to another story from today. Russia's Shadow fleet, trusted tanker network that moves sanctioned oil around the globe, is pretty much basically reportedly using Starlink terminals and cryptocurrency, with support chains routed through the intermediaries in China, Namibia, and Oman. Just look at the contrast here. On the one hand, cheap fake banknotes with QR codes dropped over northern Ukraine, and on the other hand, sanctioned oil tankers operating with modern satellite communications and financial workarounds. Completely two different scales, event type of scales, but same logic. Russia is increasingly using hybrid methods that blend the old and new, the crude and the sophisticated, the rusty hull and the modern terminal, the leaflet and the digital channel. That should tell you something uncomfortable. Sanctions do matter, but adaptation matters too. Battlefield attrition matters, but workarounds matter too. And this war being fought not only with artillery tubes, drones, trenches, but with logistics maskings, payment systems, shell company ownership, civilian digital manipulation, and repurposed commercial technology. That means anyone analyzing the conflict only through just classic military categories, or even worse, just reading the headlines, is going to keep missing half the story. And once you understand that, the energy chapter becomes much bigger. Because energy is where military pressure, civilian endurance, sanctions evasion, and global market consequences, they all collide. Here's where it gets interesting. Naftogaz says Russia carried out 129 strikes on Ukrainian gas and heating facilities during the most recent 151-day heating season. That's not just a random number, and it's not just another infrastructure statistics. That is a sustained campaign over an entire winter cycle, aimed at systems Ukrainian people, regular people, depend on for daily lives. According to the statement, the attacks hit pipelines, gas production, underground storage, and heating systems. In plain English, Russia was not just trying to damage things. It was trying to shape how Ukraine experiences winter, how industry functions, how cities cope, and how ordinary life absorbs pressure month after month. And this is why infrastructure stories matter far more than they seem on paper. A strike on a heating facility is not only about steel and concrete. It's about whether families trust the grid, whether businesses can plan ahead, emergency repair crews get exhausted, fuel reserves stretch far enough, whether just even the state itself looks resilient, and whether foreign partners feel a greater urgency to sell air defense, and spare equipment. Russia understands that very well. That is why the targeting pattern is broad. Pipelines, production, storage, heating, everything that turns modern state from a map into an actual functioning society. But there's another side to this. The very fact that Naftogaz is putting out this number now means Ukraine wants the world to understand the scale. It wants the story framed not as an isolated winter harassment, but as a methodical campaign against national resilience. And that matters for diplomacy too. When Zelensky argues for stronger security guarantees, he's not just talking about trenches in Donbass. He's talking about the fact that Russia keeps striking the systems that allow millions of civilians just to simply live, work, commute, and endure. That broader pressure is part of the negotiation backdrop, but still, if Russia spent the winter squeezing Ukrainian energy, Ukraine is increasingly trying to answer by squeezing their own Russian energy in return. And that is where the next chapter becomes the real game changer, because the pressure on Moscow's oil machine is no longer just theoretical, it is very real. Now, if that does not surprise you, this will. Reuters reported that Ukrainian strikes on port infrastructure, pipelines, refineries have reduced Russian export capability by around 1 million barrels per day, or about 20% of total capacity. 3 industry sources told Reuters that production cuts are now becoming unavoidable. And just let that sink in for a second. It's not just refinery destruction story. This is not just another dramatic image from social media. This is a report saying that the physical ability to move Russian oil outward has been reduced enough that output itself may have come down to a stop. Reuters also noted that around 20% of Russia's export capacity remains out of order, down from a peak of 40% in late March. Ust-Luga exports were suspended after drone strikes, and Russia's February oil production, according to OPEC figures cited by Reuters, stood at 9.184 million barrels per day. Another important detail here. One source said available storage was enough for weeks, but not for months, and that line is very crucial. It means that this problem might be manageable in the short term, but increasingly painful if disruption continues. A storage bottleneck turns from inconvenience into strategy when it lasts long enough. Now add the gasoline story here. Reuters says Russia imposed a ban on gasoline exports by producers until the end of July. Officially, Moscow says this is about obviously stabilizing domestic supply during the agricultural sowing campaign and coping with global oil price increases. Obviously. But Reuters also knows that several Russian regions and Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine reported gasoline shortages last year after Ukrainian attacks on refineries and amid seasonal demand increases. Russia exported nearly 5 million metric tons of gasoline last year, about 117,000 barrels per day. So once again, on paper, this is a technical market decision, but in reality, it looks like a state trying to make sure that the domestic supply remains calm while external pressure grows. And here is why this matters beyond economics. Energy is not only a source of money for Russia, it is a source of state confidence, budget predictability, foreign leverage, and domestic stability. If Ukrainian strikes keep forcing Russia to think simultaneously about exports, storage, refinery, repair, internal supply, and the workarounds through the shadow fleet, then Ukraine is doing something extremely smart. It is attacking the parts of the system that connect battlefield power with national endurance. That does not mean that Russia is collapsing overnight. I mean, let's be serious, maybe it is just a wishful thinking for many people, but it's not happening. Russia output only fell 0.8% last year to 10.28 million barrels per day, despite sanctions and drone pressure. So the system is still functioning. But the point is not instant collapse. The point is accumulated friction. Enough friction changes timelines, budgets, and strategic confidence. And that is why all these seemingly separate moments and articles matter. The war is not slowing into simplicity. It is becoming more layered, more technical, more economic, and more global at the exact moment the world's attention is being pulled in several directions at once. And if you want to understand what may happen next, you will need to watch the Frontline updates, watch Crimea, watch energy, watch whether diplomacy can keep up with the pace of military pressure. Or you can simply let me brief you daily, and if you want that easier option, please guys make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Don't forget about the Patreon, link is down below. Thanks so much, see you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.